on serious cinema, now, question, first question I'd like to ask is, why and how did this movement evolve? How do you see it, in what context do you see it?
Well, this movement has been there right from the beginning. Medium of cinema is basically medium of communication. Sometimes you tell a story, sometimes you narrate an experience, sometimes you narrate imagined fictions or situations. Sometimes you also go into surrealistic images and you do abstract communication. So there always have been different kind of cinemas, different kind of communications. So there was never like, you can't say that, put a date that this is when parallel cinema or new cinema or meaningful cinema started. It has been there right from the beginning. That it became visible for a period of time when lots of people got involved in it, primarily because of National Film Development Corporation taking an active interest in giving loans and making of this kind of film. So you had a whole lot of people from the south, from Kerala, from Tamil Nadu, from Bombay, from Bengal, linked in a kind of movement which you could say that was a parallel cinema movement. Well, I mean, didn't have much of a base, and that is why it couldn't carry on for a long time. And today it probably is emerging in a very different shape. But I can't really pinpoint and say that this is the period, or this is when it started, or this is when it ended, or whatever. There always is a will or desire among some people to share their own experiences, their own perspective about society, about life, and that will continue.
Do you think the state is responsible for fostering good cinema or meaningful cinema in this movement?
Whether the state should be responsible? Well, there are many answers to this, really. I mean, in my opinion, I think any culture which or cultural movement or cultural insinuation which is basically subsidized will find it hard to sustain. So it has to be self-sustaining. Thereby, what one says, that it has to be liked, it has to be patronized by common cinema-going people, even if it is a small section. There has to be, even if it is a parallel cinema-making movement, there has to be a parallel cinema exhibition movement, there should be a parallel cinema distribution movement, and there should be a parallel cinema goers movement. Because unless and until you link the whole line, you can't sustain. And this is what went wrong with the so-called parallel cinema movement, because a whole lot of people were making films. The state was subsidizing the production on the films. But there was no distribution, there was no exhibition, there were no cinemas, and there was no public coming to the cinemas to see this kind of film. Because it was a big advantage, big moment which we lost.
Why didn't the public come?
Yeah, in spite of two microphones. No, that's fine. Yeah.
Why do you think the audience never really wanted to use the public to come out to watch?
No, the public came or public would have wanted to come, but there were no cinemas consistently showing this kind of cinema. There were a whole lot of social problems, which the stigmas which were attached to the kind of class which would have come to see the films. The other factor was emergence of television and the satellite networks, which offered in-home entertainment to the major section of the audience which would have come to this cinema. So all said and done, eventually, as I have myself come to believe, that good cinema or parallel cinema will be able to sustain only if it merges with the mainstream and it is able to seek its own position in the mainstream cinema going audience. The whole dream of having smaller cinemas and totally different distribution network may probably not come true because of the market forces or because of the capital involved in it, and the experiment in Uttar Pradesh to have smaller cinemas networked with the state film finance corporation didn't work, and so even Akashwani, one cinema which was being managed by NLTC, didn't work. So obviously, unless and until there is a commercial viability, even if it's a lesser percentage than the mainstream cinema, unless and until you do find your share in the mainstream cinema and you are able to self-sustain it, not keep on thinking that you can make films on a subsidized method. And I don't think it will be able to really be purposeful. I can't ever say that the movement is dead, because it really, in all essence, was never a movement. It always existed. It always exists. The desire to be able to say, things that you want to say. This is the departure point, the difference between the commercial cinema and the meaningful cinema. Because, meaningful cinema, the departure point is that you want to say something. You don't want to just make a film for making money, but you want to say something. In the process, of course, the commerce is involved, whatever it is. So the desire to say something through this medium will always be there. There are a whole lot of people, you could say that lesser meaningful, purposeful and parallel cinema in Hindi is being made, but Kannada, Malayalam and Bengali and other languages, they are still being made. Because there it's commercially a little more viable than making the films in Hindi, because Hindi films have to compete in terms of distribution and exhibition with the national mainstream, main popular cinema. They don't have to compete, so they do get some kind of exhibition. But at the same time, I think there is always a process of re-emergence, in the sense that you think of newer methods of being able to say what you want to say, and in the language which they are able to understand. So probably a new kind of cinema can be born, a new kind of cinema can be worked out for the main Hindi language. But there are definitely a lot of filmmakers, lot of people, lot of script writers who are working, will continue to work, even if it is for personal gratification.
How do you look back on the experience of making Mrityu Dand? I would say this was some sort of a compromise that you have achieved in your own way of being able to say what you want to in a manner that, as you say, the common man.
Mrityu Dand can be labelled as a film which merges the two, in the sense that the content or the essence of the content is very realistic. The characters are very realistic. The situation and the composition of the scenario picks up a lot from the grammar of popular cinema. So while you create the conflict, the tension, the the method of using music and the dialogues and things like that from the popular cinema. You give a persona of the popular cinema, but at the same time you are able to say what you want to say. You are able to have try and have, like, you have Madhuri Dixit from the main glamorous streams, you have Shabana Azmi, Om Puris, Mohan Joshis. So there is a balance of good actors from both kinds of cinema, and there is an interest which is sustained in terms of storytelling. So for me it was a very satisfying experience, because what eventually turned out didn't remain entirely personal, but it was exhibited in the mainstream cinemas, exhibited all over the country. It did well in some places, didn't do very well in other places, but it was accepted and it was liked, and from the people, the cinema going people, it did mean a lot to hear good things about the film. Well, it will be, won't it be a little paradoxical or ironic, some kind of an irony, if you really said that some kind of political movement or some kind of idealism was being propagated through this cinema, because the government or the authorities supporting the movement during that period then would be labeled as totally anti that kind of idealism or that kind of political message, and I don't think anybody would really pay for being criticized or subsidize a sort of an anti-establishment view. I don't think that is really a sort of a leveled charge. I think that there was independence, there was autonomy in terms of functioning, in terms of approval of script, in terms of being able to make films, and even if it was at the cost of establishment. So there was a lot of tolerance as far as NFDC or let's say other government bodies who were supporting this kind of cinema. It's now, over the period of later 80s and early 90s that we see a lot of intolerance. That was one period where we were able to not even think about, that this subject is anti-establishment, or this subject is propagating something, or this subject is political in nature. If it is political, it is political. If it is social, it is social. Subject was what mattered. But I don't think there was any conscious effort, by the filmmaker, whether it was Saeed or whether it was me or Kundan or Ketan or Shyam or anybody. I don't think, but of course we were all concerned, we were all activists in our own way. We were social activists. In fact, I would like to introduce myself as a filmmaker and social activist, because I am one. At least I can't remain a silent spectator to social changes which keep on happening all the time. And my method of communication is cinema, so it will definitely affect my cinema. So is the case with the others. So I really wouldn't say that that was being consciously propagated, or that was one charge, and that is why because there will always be people who will be up against injustice, up against things they feel are not right, and there will always be people who will like to analyze changes which do keep occurring in our society. And the movement that you are talking about, which I still feel that there never really was a movement. It was always, it just like peaked. There was opportunity, and there was the support from the National Film Development Corporation, and there was ample recognition for this kind of cinema which was coming in, in terms of exhibition, in terms of the intellectuals, and So it did gain a lot of points, which, when the open market economy and the market forces began to play, and culture took a back seat in terms of government priorities, market became important, it became difficult to sustain. When NFDC was asked to fend for itself and earn through imported X-rated films and do all sorts of things to be able to, pay its salaries, I think that was hint enough that this kind of cinema cannot be, subsidized, or we were changing our priorities, which is fine, which I think we should adapt to, and which I think we should take up as a challenge, and we should, if we do intend to continue to be able to say or to make way for saying what we want to say, then I'm sure we will find ways to say it.